boy Jay, the host, and you know who I got with me, Bryson. Sullivan is back in the house. Tech Heads podcast is like up, growing, and running. It's like a baby that you birthed. And now, how do you feel about it, brother, man?
I feel like people are more invested in this than I am. I mean, no, I definitely love doing it. I definitely like having the conversations with my other co-hosts, Dr. Obbs and Molly. We get a chance to talk about some things you wouldn't normally get a chance to talk about, and we get a chance to interview people that we really don't have any right to. But no, it's been fun. You know, I think the 2023 season has a lot of things in store from a technical side that haven't really been talked about yet. I know a lot of discussion is about the competitive order and where Red Bull is and Mercedes is, and it's been a long time since you and I talked, and there's a couple of things to get into, but there's a lot of tech stuff as well, so I'm kind of enjoying that.
Yeah, definitely, man. There is a lot of tech stuff, so why don't we hop into some of that? Because we already know the biggest filet mignon on the table right now is the W14 predecessor of the W13, and people round two already giving up on it, ready to jump ship. People, you know, it's a lot going on. But to be fair, I think to hear the words come out of Toto's mouth about, listen, we literally got it wrong. To see Lewis Hamilton definitely discouraged, while people thought it was going to be a lot more positive coming in. And there are some other things that we can get into, but let's just stick to this development, because you have a background and a lot of things that you can apply here. What do you think you see fundamentally incorrect about the car? And if you don't see it, what are you expecting from here on going forward?
I mean, the thing that we always have to kind of prevent ourselves from being lured into is this trap of looking at a vehicle, right? Looking at and focusing on the things that we can observe about it, and then extrapolating, that's a specific thing. It was wrong from the beginning. It was never going to be successful. I mean, that's never true. I mean, there's, as I've said before, I've even stopped using the word concept to describe cars. I started using the word philosophy to better emphasize that what's going on here is more involved than just what the side pods are or what the front wing is or any specific thing. It's how all of these things work together.
Right.
And so the thing that I would focus on is not even so much what I see, it's what the team itself is seeing and what the team itself is doing. I think the most fundamental thing is that clearly there are different side pod designs for different cars up and down the grid. And we're getting to a point now where it's becoming clear that the side pods are a more critical factor, and the design is a more critical factor in this current generation of cars than it was previously. Not only that, the same feedback loop that you would normally have that would give you more and more performance as far as making the side pods smaller and smaller and smaller just doesn't seem to be a thing anymore. And, you know, if I had to make an educated guess as to why that's the case, is that it's the same parts of the air regulations that are designed to make the cars easier to follow each other suddenly take away certain things that we had previously. I'm talking about the barge boards in front of the floor that would create a lot of outwash. They used to have, you know, blown axles through the wheel to move the brake duct flow outboard, generating this huge wake, you know, this aerodynamic footprint of the car that was great for your own performance, but was bad for the
chase car, right?
And so this idea that shrinking the side pods into non-existence almost, even though that may have been a positive trend in the previous generation of cars, the evidence is suggesting that it's not quite the same anymore. And I think one of the reasons why it's so difficult is trying to manage that front tire wake. Now, the wake that's coming off that spinning, rotating front tire, it is low energy, it's very turbulent, and if it gets into critical areas like the side of the floor or towards the back of the Coke bottle in the car and the diffuser, it can rob you of downforce. And so it's just one of those things where the way that Mercedes is treating that front tire wake was just fundamentally different than every other team. And it seems like designs in a different part of the design space are more successful at handling that. There's so much going on with the floor I don't know about. There's so much going on with other things that I don't know about. But that's one of the most critical things. And also having a proper side pod with an undercut or anything like that, it lets you work the front of the floor a little bit harder as well. So all of these things are interconnected. And as I said, Mercedes is in a difficult position right now.
Yes.
But I think Bahrain was probably one of the best things that could happen to the team. And what I mean by that is if they weren't beaten so convincingly, so clearly, and so also by a customer team.
Right.
If they didn't have that kind of clear evidence, you couldn't find yourself in a situation where they weren't fully convinced that they were going down the wrong path. They could actually keep pushing and say, actually, maybe we just got the setup wrong. Maybe it's the track conditions. Maybe that's what's causing it.
Right.
No, that kind of beating
That's no.
Is from a scientific point of view, it's unambiguous, right? There's clearly correlation there.
Nice.
So all I would say about it is I definitely think that was a wake-up call. It was a positive thing because it really motivated the team. Not that they weren't motivated before,
right?
But it got them to be a little bit more bold in exploring different design directions. And so, yes, it's painful in the short term, but I think long term is a positive outcome.
So I know downforce, like initially, even last season, you had said that downforce is not a problem, but it seems like downforce is playing a problem. Now, is the downforce a problem because of the leading and trailing edge of the car as far as the front wing and rear wing? Or are we now moving to the fact that downforce is a problem probably because intricacy of the floor and the side pods, or no? Where are we looking for to see what's more culpable about that?
Yeah, it's kind of a weird thing. So I would describe what's going on as kind of a reaction to what Red Bull was doing last season. And one of the things that Red Bull had was they had pretty good high-speed cornering performance, pretty good downforce. The thing that was like jumping off the page was their insane high speed, just like 10 kph,
out there.
15 kph faster than anyone. And in fact, they're still very fast.
They're still
probably
very
the fastest of all. But there were teams last season that were trying to react to this. And so the way this normally works is if you want to add more downforce to the car, that adds drag and that reduces your top speed. So conversely, if a team is totally beating you in top speed, you might try to reduce downforce or trim it back to a level and also reduce the baseline drag of the car to be able to actually compete with them. The problem is if that sensitivity of how much downforce do you lose versus how much drag do you lose is too steep, you can hit the target drag levels, you can get the drag of the car down, but you've lost so much downforce in the process of doing that suddenly you can't have the same high-speed performance in the corners. And also, having higher downforce also improves tire degradation. I know some people were asking me if that makes sense. And isn't it the more you push the car to the track, the more like it's squishing it? And
less it's sliding. So
exactly.
Unless you're killing that tire. Right.
Yeah, you drive, I could tell.
Right.
So the more downforce you have in general, the easier it is to prevent the wheel from sliding, not only in the high-speed cornering, but under braking as well. People always think downforce is about cornering, but not only does it give you a ton of drag, which helps you when you're braking, but also the more normal force you're pushing the car into the track with, the harder you can hit the brakes before they lock up.
Right.
So it helps in a whole number of things.
Friction thing.
The W14 definitely is it's a car that seems to have hit the aero targets that Mercedes set for themselves, but they could never know what other teams were going to do. And in fact, if you look at the entire grid, the grid is actually remarkably close in terms of outright pace and lap time.
It is,
except for Red Bull.
Right.
Red Bull is the it's Formula
the
Red
outlier,
Bull, and then sort of everyone else right now. And so what I would say about that is the W14 it's lacking overall downforce compared to the Aston Martin, and this is kind of what I was, and especially Red Bull and other teams. But it's not quite as bad as far as drag goes as with the W13. I know there's been some reporting from some respectable outlets trying to suggest that the reason why the W14 is slow is because it has too much drag. It's just not accurate. It's just as competitive, where it's mid-level drag or the lower third of drag as far as the cars go. If you look at the speed trap data, which is not hard to look at. But all I'd say about that is, if you're lacking downforce and you're trying to figure out is it the mechanical part of the car, is it a gearbox, is it the power unit, is it whatever, Aston Martin is giving us beautiful information because it's basically like a science experiment, right? You have controlled variables and you have the other factors. So we have the same engine or power unit in this case.
Power unit, suspension.
We've got the same rear suspension. We've got the same gearbox, and we have a car that was developed in the same wind tunnel.
Facts.
Right? So you can. This is actually, and as I said before, it seems like an embarrassing situation to have a customer team outperform you. But for the purposes of a comeback, that's actually the perfect situation because you can identify variables and figure out what the issue is and what the issue is not. And yes, I know we like to talk about mechanical stuff and aero being separate, but they're not really. The W14 definitely has an aero problem. But that's not to say that you can't improve the aerodynamic characteristics with mechanical changes, i.e. changes to rear suspension, front suspension, relating to how the car is riding on top of the ground, both in terms of how it responds to bumps and everything else, but also the ability to work the floor as to its optimum. So I think all these things are related. 2023 is going to be a painful year for Mercedes fans, but at the same time, I think people overestimate how important development for the next car will be versus the current car. And what I mean by that is I've heard these murmurs and rumors and rumblings about the team completely stopping any development whatsoever on the current car, just focus on next year's car. And the reason why that doesn't really make any sense is because the regulations are stable between this year and next year, roughly speaking. We don't have the same porpoising problem that would give you the tendency to tweak regulations more. But the thing is, the fact that you have stable regulations means that if you do design some amazing concept in the wind tunnel, some things find you like 5 tenths, 6 tenths, something amazing, it's never going to happen that way. You have to, build it up over time. You can bring that design forward to the current car and apply it to the current car within mechanical considerations and the chassis and everything, but test those concepts out now, gather data on them, and then apply them to the next year's car. We're just not in a situation where you have like a Haas in 2021 where they completely stop developing their car and they focus completely on the next year. The reason why that won't happen is because that was a situation where the regulations were changing massively and there was just no carryover from what was going on in 2021 to 2022. So I think there's definitely scope for improvement. There's definitely going to be some changes to the way that the power dynamic is. Right now, Red Bull seems to be running away with it to the point where I think they might be concerned that if they keep winning by these types of margins, there may be a reaction in the F1 and the FIA to sort of pull them back. I'm not sure I agree with that philosophy in general, but
me either.
We're having that conversation now because
the same conversation has been held in regards to Mercedes.
With regards to Mercedes, that's true.
Right.
But in the Mercedes era, there wasn't an explicit desire to bring the cars closer together in the same way.
Facts.
We didn't have a cost cap then. We didn't have the aerodynamic testing restrictions.
Right.
So Formula One is such a strange thing because it's trying to balance, it's trying to walk this fine line between a pure constructor's engineering challenge of making your own car, constructing your own car, but also having like close racing. And you don't want to have a spec series, right? But at the same time, you don't want to give the biggest and most resourceful teams free reign because we'll just run away with it.
Just run away with it, right?
And you also don't want to have like WEC style BOP, right? You don't want to just like add weight to the cars if they're too fast. Right. I think everyone has a reflexive reaction to that, just even saying the words. And so I think what Formula One's trying to do is do BOP, but in a step removed sense. Instead of just putting weight on the car as it's produced, they're trying to influence how easy it is for teams to react to regulation changes and react to things and build a fast car. And that really has caught out Mercedes. And I think it's even caught out Ferrari to a degree.
Oh, yeah.
I know it seems crazy after
we'll get on that.
I'll finish with this. I know it seems crazy to think that after last season, how we were talking, this is a Red Bull and Ferrari title fight to the end of the season, after the first couple of races. And now, 12 months later, we're genuinely asking questions about whether or not even Ferrari has the right concept. Everyone's talking about Mercedes' concept,
right,
and how they've got it wrong.
Ferrari's
we're starting to see discussions in the Italian media and in media in general that even Ferrari is going to get to a point in the near future where they will evaluate their concept, and that's just a reflection of how much time Red Bull gained in the offseason.
Right, man. So let's hit on a little other area of popularity right now. Lewis Russell does seem like things are kind of a rift a bit. Lewis' last press conference, he pretty much, he was asked about what did you think about Russell's finishing. Like, hey, they ain't got nothing to do with me, but it's good for the team. I do feel like Russell's taking some stances that as a teammate and as somebody in the team, you shouldn't concern yourself with taking, especially when it comes to whether somebody else should have got a penalty or not. I do feel like certain people are taking stances on things that they didn't take on stance on Abu Dhabi 2021 when that was totally egregious. When it comes to sim racing, it's like a blow up. It comes to Alonso getting a penalty that was similar to what Esteban got the round one. It's like a blow up. How do you feel about the dynamic of the teammates right now between Lewis Hamilton and Russell, and even bringing in Toto?
No, I mean, so in a situation where a team that has been dominant for years upon years is actually experiencing genuine struggles, not just for 1 year, but for multiple years now, as far as Mercedes goes, any kind of hardship or difficulty that team experiences is going to be amplified to 11.
Facts.
And people who really can't be trusted at their word for why they're actually making noise are going to make a lot of noise.
Facts.
In terms of what individual drivers say, what the car is doing. This is it's just a whole conversation that's really not even worth spending time on, because there's going to be a lot of noise in this moment when Mercedes is having difficulties, because people have been salivating, waiting for it. Finally get them. We finally got them.
Fall.
we finally got them, and this is their Super Bowl. This is a Super Bowl for these people. So I kind of ignore a lot of the noise with respect to that. With regard to George, though, I think George has made clear, both in Jeddah and to a degree, last year with Hungary. No, it wasn't Hungary. It was actually Zandvoort, the Dutch GP. He's willing to disobey team orders or make split decision choices if he thinks it will benefit them, if he thinks it will benefit him. And Mercedes as a team has demonstrated that they're not willing to pull a rank on him and say you can't do that or you shouldn't do that because it will disadvantage your teammate. So that seems to be the new status quo now. That's not necessarily what my impression was at the at the beginning of the season, but that is what it is now. And I think when you're talking about Lewis's tone, what he was saying, I think that is his internalization of the status quo changing, which is to say, if George is given an opportunity to put himself in a better position, then he will, and he's not going to expect anymore for George to follow team orders. Now, someone will say, well, no, George, had the pace. He was told to speed up, and eventually he just got down the road. What I would say about that is, if you have better pace than someone, follow team orders in the moment that they're given. Give the person behind you the opportunity to show their pace because they were faster than you and on a softer compound. Right. And then if you're faster than them, just overtake them later. I mean, you have the pace. You have the pace to do so. But by virtue of not following that instruction at the moment that it was given, we didn't even have an opportunity to see what Lewis's pace actually was, because you're following in the air about the car behind. It is true that the 2022 regulations, or post-2022 regulations, have made it easier for the cars to follow each other. But as we add performance to the car, add downforce to the cars, that's going to be eroded to a degree, because, as we said before, the more you rely on aerodynamics to begin with, the more sensitive they are to the flow around you and the car in front of you. So even though the current cars are still better than the old generation cars, as they get faster and faster and faster, that dirty air is going to still be a problem. Regarding some of the other teams and the dynamic there and how things have been unfolding, Alonso and Stroll have gotten along together so much better than
I anticipated.
After Coda last year, I imagined that was going to be fireworks from race one.
I did.
And given Lance's unusual and strange accident and the kind of heroic things he kind of had to do to get back in the car, that seemed to have been an event that kind of brought those two together to make them much more friendly working as a team. And of course, never hurts when the car is great and you can enjoy the things there. There's an emerging dynamic at Red Bull as well that we could get into.
Oh yeah.
But I'm sure he will, but I do want to talk a little bit about what's going on with Aston Martin and their penalty.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that next, actually. So let's go ahead and get into it.
I mean, we've been talking about the irregularities in the way that Formula One is governed for a long time. Abu Dhabi is just one example of that, but it's much, much bigger than that. And I think fundamentally there's a disconnect between the wording of the regulations that's being used to actually govern the sport and the way the sport's actually being governed. There's too many unspoken agreements and understandings in the way that the sport's supposed to behave in terms of what is the intent of the regulations and what is the letter of it.
The letter,
yeah,
right.
and this is kind of less of an issue with the technical regulations because teams are assumed they're going to pursue every possible thing regardless of what your intent was. Whatever the rules specifically say, that's what they're going to operate to. But that's on the sporting side of it. It's been a little bit more ambiguous regarding Alonso's penalty. He was too far to his left when he was lining up on his graded box, right. And that's an improper start. And the current procedure is to give someone a 5-second time penalty for that. Ocon was given the same penalty.
Yeah, he was
for the same infraction. Now, to be clear, there were other cars on the grid that were not as far as Alonso, but like farther than Ocon, right. And they weren't penalized. So even that is already a problem. But sidestepping that, if you look at what happened when Alonso came in, the rule is you're not allowed to work on the car under the time frame in which you're serving your penalty. And by normal understanding of the way that that's working is that means you can't touch the car.
You can't touch the car
in that window. However, as Fernando came in and the rear jack man came in, he did set the jack up, engage it, with the car, right when Alonso came in during the time window. He didn't lift the car up because you're not allowed to do whatever, but he touched the car with the jack, and then eventually it came to light that that happened. The FIA missed it originally. Okay. That's part of the reason why it took so long for that penalty to show up, is because they reviewed it at the time and thought it was fine,
right.
And then they were tipped off, likely by Mercedes, that there was engagement there, and then they gave a penalty based on this no touching rule. The problem is Aston Martin, and again, you got to give Aston Martin credit for being vicious on the track and off the track.
I do.
They had, within half an hour, they had a list of seven different instances
right.
of when a jack was touching the car and it was unpunished. The difference here is that it was always the front jack that was touching the car.
I'm glad you said that.
And the thing is, the argument has always been, oh, well, the front jack is used to guide the car, and et cetera, et cetera. It's right. Like, even allowing that's a problem,
right?
From a governance point of view, we can already see that if the regulation says no touching, no touching, well, that's just like a meme. No touching, no touching of the car,
right?
And then you allow touching. But it's just commonly understood that, well, we'll just allow this type of touching, but you don't put it in the regulations. That gives a team with the temerity and the wherewithal the ability to push back on that and explore that and say, well, you know what? You didn't penalize, 7 other teams for doing the exact same thing we're doing. How can you penalize us for this in this race? And
right.
the argument is completely valid in that there is no ground to stand on if you are going to arbitrarily punish this one team versus another one. And maybe even, who knows, Esteban Ocon, if Alpine had like better lawyers or better people ready to go, they could have maybe fought their penalty too. Who knows?
Right.
But Aston Martin did fight it. So it's just the latest instance in a growing and concerning trend that the way that the FIA governs the sport is consistent with the smaller sport, old F1, the way things used to be. Mm-hmm. The problem is Formula One has grown exponentially in the last few years, but it's still being governed like a private club.
Right.
And the thing is, there's just too much at stake now. There's too much money involved. There's too many eyes on the sport now to continue running it like that. I think that was just the most recent example of it.
Right. Now, I feel like the front jack situation is a bit of an area where I can understand, because the front jack sits there. The car literally pulls into the front jack. It's not really like the front jack man is coming in, the car stopping, he makes contact. It's literally there for a guy point. The car makes its contact on approach to the front jack. I think the secondary initiation of the rear jack come in, it is where you should constitute where that can happen. If they're going to rewrite the regs, they need to be very clear about that process and how it will lay out. That is what I firmly believe. And another thing I believe is this. If they showed you 7 other instances, although the front jack, then you really saying to yourself, we got it wrong all this time. But I do think the front jack allowed, rear jack not. I think more so they overturned that due to the money issue, the fact that Alonso's talking about sponsorship and it's his 100th podium and maybe they don't want it to look a certain way. Same thing we kind of had it up that. Like, it's like we want a climatic end. We want a climatic end, and to take this from Alonso's like 100th podium, it just sells better. So I think there are a lot of things mixed in there, but I do agree with you on the regulations and how they're written out, and they need to focus on like really pinpoint. If they didn't learn after 2021, what's going to make them learn? And I think you made a very good point with like, hey, you can't keep running the sport this way, but they seem like they want to continue to try to do that.
It would be naive of me to suggest to anyone that who is making the complaint and who's having a problem has no impact on how the FIA behaves. The fact of the matter is different people having the same problem are handled differently.
True.
Which is not the way that it should be for a mature organization.
Right.
But yes, it's not lost on me that the fact that this is Alonso, this is his 100th podium,
right.
All these other factors are relevant to whether or not this was overturned. But again, to be clear, you give Aston Martin credit.
They left themselves open, right?
Well, they Aston Martin came forward with the evidence,
right, and that's what I'm saying. The FIA left themselves open to it. And they exposed it.
Regardless of whatever else is going on, Aston Martin was willing to fight that fight. If anything, in retrospect, and we already know how I feel about this, but Mercedes should have fought that Abu Dhabi thing more. There's no question that the FIA, in its current guise, was unwilling or unable to actually own up to its own behavior,
right.
And they were never going to be coerced into doing so. There would have been a lot of collateral damage if Mercedes did decide to fight that case.
True.
But I don't think there's any question that they would have won it.
I feel the same way, and I told people this much. I said, on a business aspect, I think kind of like in other sports, if you're going to sue the organization, I don't think you're competing in the following year. If you're in a legality situation where you're literally taking them to court, I don't know how that would work. But in some sports, it's like, okay, well, you're not competing in the next season. If we're literally in a legal situation where you're suing us for an operation standpoint, and I think Mercedes let that kind of go, and I think they shouldn't have. And I don't think that they would have lost had it went up to a court before a judge. I don't think they would have lost. They would have won, and they would have been therefore, what's the good word? They would have been proven correct in everything, and everything set right, at least in that standard. Now, do you think even if they do that, what prompt or what energy or what motivation do you think the FIA go ahead and just totally rewrite everything and overhaul the entire regulation? Do you think they do that, or do they think they take the slap on the wrist and they just keep moving the way they've been moving? Do you think that would have been a finite point that would have made the FIA change the way they're doing business and we wouldn't see some of these things now, or you think they still would have carried on as they have been?
I mean, first of all, to be clear, there are limitations to what Mercedes could do as far as how they personally were approaching this and whether they could take something to an external court, like an arbitration court. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean that there's zero options.
Okay.
I think that there are some options that they could have pursued, or even some external third party could pursue. Just say, hey, listen, I think that this is wrong. Let's investigate this and get into it. But do I think that they were going to do something? I mean, or make changes in reaction to that? I mean, definitely. I think they already tried to do that. They put in 2 race directors. They changed, the wording of some regulations, allegedly to prevent it from being misunderstood, but in reality to protect it from abuses of power.
Right, NDA Massey, got him.
Why they changed it. But also they set up this remote operations center.
Okay.
This ROC that they used even in the race in Jeddah to determine if Alonso's penalty was correctly served, and it didn't help. It didn't help. That remote operations center missed the contact with the rear jack just like everyone else did.
Right.
So I'm not sure what the solution is long term, but I know that something has to change, and I'm just looking forward to seeing it.
All right.
And just one final point.
Go ahead, brother man.
I know it's very popular, and I know I had to also give the FIA some grief about them doing this job incorrectly because they're not doing it correctly. Lots on the line. But to be clear, we need the FIA.
I agree.
We need the FIA operating in the best version of itself, not only to ensure the sporting fairness and equity in Formula One, but also because they're the chief people responsible for the safety of the sport. right?
Correct.
We rely on them to keep the drivers safe, to keep the fans safe, and the marshals safe. It's important for everyone that they're doing what their job entails and doing it well.
True.
If I'm hard on the FIA, it's because not only do I know they can do better, but the sport needs them to do better, and we need them to be better to really succeed.
I totally agree with that. I do. I think without the FIA, you're gonna have a much worse situation. I think some people believe let the teams run the sport, and I don't believe that's a good thing. I don't. I think that would be chaotic, at minimum, chaotic. So let's go into Ferrari is falling, man. Like, there's been all types of memes out there and all types of suggestions that, Lewis Hamilton should go to Ferrari. And I've taken a stand like, what are you all looking at? Like, I think you all are so focused on Mercedes problems. You don't even realize the problems that Ferrari's having. Like, literally, Ferrari started off Charles' 2023 season like he never left 2022. Like, they have fond amount of issues. They've lost the engineer. They lost David Sanchez. They got Fred Vasseur in, and he's in a situation typical, kind of similar to what an NFL coach would be going to a franchise that's losing, and you just lost your star quarterback. So he's not in a good situation. I don't think Charles losing confidence. So Ferrari falling now pretty much like out of the last race, the fourth fastest team. What do you think? Let's talk about Fred first. How do you feel like Fred can turn this around, and does he even have the power and the ability to do so with what lies above him? Because I think people miss Ferrari organizationally have an issue with inside that I don't think Fred can fight, my opinion. What is your opinion on that?
The fact that it was Fred Vasseur who was promoted into this role, as opposed to them once again promoting from internally, suggests to me that even in the higher up situations in Ferrari, they're willing to make some radical changes. They're willing to recognize and understand that there is a culture inside of the team that is, for whatever reason, not producing the results that they're interested in.
True.
And they need another set of eyes to come in from the outside and say, oh, this is on fire. That's on fire, and specifically, this fire is hotter than that fire.
Okay,
right. This is the thing to focus on, and honestly, Fred. I mean, I did have a chance to meet him for about 2 seconds last year. He seemed like a pretty funny and straightforward guy, but he also seemed like an OBS type of guy.
Okay,
and one of the key things that he said recently in one of the interviews was, we just have to not BS ourselves. Speaking about Ferrari, earlier on in the first race in Bahrain, there were so many qualifiers and caveats as to why this wouldn't be a Red Bull runaway championship. Well, this is a very rear-limited circuit. The track surface is very abrasive. Tire degradation counts for more in Bahrain than in other places.
Right.
But Ferrari got the setup wrong. All of these things that say, let's not, push the panic button just yet. And now we come to Jeddah, which is a completely different circuit. Yes, there's some high-speed corners, but there's a lot of, flat-out straights that, in principle, would be very beneficial to Ferrari. They had some pretty good top speed in Bahrain, and Red Bull was even further away. In fact, we know that they're further away because of a Perez and Verstappen dynamic, which we'll get into. They were actually forced to race each other.
Right.
And so instead of being able to manage in a stable configuration, they were pushing each other at approximately their full pace, and it's big pace.
Big pace.
It is at least a second faster than Aston Martin, at least 2 seconds faster than pretty much every other car on the grid. So they're cooking right now. But the thing is, what impressed me, so all of those things that we could use to sort of explain why maybe Ferrari isn't as in a bad situation as we thought they might be, those are much harder to say now. Okay. They are definitely in a situation where there's major work that needs to happen. And as I said before, Ferrari, the team that was fighting Red Bull for the championship last season, even they are not immune from questions of concept changes and looking at things. They're not quite as bad as Mercedes is yet, and they're not going to make changes as quickly, but they have up the proverbial mountain to climb still. But I do think that Fred has the power to push back to people. I do think that he has the power to fire people that normally would not be fired. And so I do think that they can turn around. But as you said, they're losing time. I think we're actually starting the 5th season of Charles Leclerc at Ferrari.
Yeah, right.
Because he was there in 2019. And so you're starting to ask the question of whether or not his time is being wasted there. and all this talk about Lewis, where's he going to do? Is he going to go to another team? I think all that is once again part of this wider reaction to Mercedes struggling and all the things that are associated with that.
Right.
I don't think there's any real truth to that yet. Mercedes has a tough job to do, but I think Lewis being there is his best option. But as far as Ferrari goes, I think that they understand that what Red Bull is doing, and to an extent what Aston Martin is doing, has fundamentally changed the perception of the entire grid. Because the entire grid gained, 7/10 here, 8/10, some teams a second if they're slow. But Aston Martin gained 2 seconds, and Red Bull gained almost a second from where they already were.
Right.
So it proves that as I said, we're still early in the development cycle of these regulations. So this is like the sophomore year of these regulations. There's a huge amount of development potential left. We haven't seen the fastest version of these cars. Mm-hmm. This is why I tell people also, don't fall in love. Don't become seduced by every contour and shape of the Red Bull cars right now. Everyone looks at them because of how high their performance is and says, that's the center of the bullseye. This is the optimal design for this current regulations. And I don't think it's true.
No.
If Red Bull has the opportunity to develop more, they're going to go even further and find even more things. We see Adrian Newey walking up and down the grid on the grid walk, looking at the Aston Martin, and people thinking that, he's just looking down on it and thinking,
no, he's not.
No,
he's not. You can tell that man is studying, bro.
he is looking how to make his car even faster.
Right.
He recognizes the threat that Aston Martin represents, not because of where they are right now, but because where they will be tomorrow.
Right.
The jump that they've shown in the offseason is
crazy. To me, it's crazy.
It's an implicit threat to Red Bull.
Right.
So I think that's the reason why they're keeping an eye on them.
Yeah, and I think not only that, you still have to be aware, like we said, so many of the same variables in that car exist in the Mercedes. So now we still have to understand, like, Mercedes are a lot closer maybe to making this jump than if something really changes and Aston overtakes than we may be. And that's the same thing we thought and I've said it myself, and I'm going to be upfront and say it. I might have been wrong, that if Mercedes with their concept gets it right and things start to perform and the ceiling is above what you've already seen, then what you have is a shift in power, because everybody's going to want to do what's the best. But to try to make that change to Mercedes variation the best, you literally are probably going to have to chunk 2 seasons in the hole to get there. It's not the same. So, but now with this not being the case, I was incorrect with what I thought, and I'm okay with saying that because things change at an abundant rate in Formula One. And I also think people they overestimate an update. Like, you think an update is not finna bring you a full even second. Like, you're talking about tenths, hundreds of seconds accumulatively over time of many updates to get there. And people think you're going to stick one update on and you're going to find 5 seconds. It's not happening like that.
No. And Ross Brawn has kind of a famous quote about this, is that you're never going to find one change to the car that's worth a second. But you can find 10 changes to the car that are each worth a tenth of a second. Right? So the entire thing is cumulative. The entire thing is integrated. It's compounding. And it's something that just requires time to get into. Again, people think that this is an algorithmic, pure step A, step B, step C process by developing the car and say, we'll just put performance on incrementally, step by step by step. And the thing is, the shape that the car has right now and the performance directions in which you're pushing it are a reflection of the people building it. It's a reflection of their own technical background, their preferences, their perception of which parts of the car are most critical to performance, and more importantly, like, how you're going to do it. Are you going to put more emphasis on the front wing downforce, or are you going to give that up a little bit to make the floor work harder? How are you handling that front tire wake? I mean, these are all ideas people have that are mostly grounded in facts and reality and everything. But there's always the overlap between perception and reality is never 100%. And so there are things that we think we know, that we consider for bookkeeping purposes as knowledge, but isn't actually knowledge. It's just correlation. It's like we thought that we understood how this works and where the performance is. But as I said before, the stopwatch never lies, and so that's the ultimate decider of whether you're on the right track or not.
That's true, man. So let's talk about tracks, because I think, is Jeddah like one of your favorite tracks? Seeing it at night? I think one of those night shots, I think you think is really dope. What's your favorite track, by the way, before we get into it? What's your favorite circuit?
Favorite track to drive? Like I'm a driver.
Yeah,
I'm a driver.
yeah.
But favorite track that I like to see the drivers drive is probably Spa.
Okay. Hey, all right.
I like the elevation changes.
I like boom in the essence. I like it.
Eau Rouge and Radion is obviously a great complex, but I like the middle sector, Pouon, the Fania chicane, Stavelo 1 and 2. It's just a very cool track. But Jeddah is an interesting track, mm-hmm. and I think the one thing we haven't really talked about, I mean, the biggest two storylines of Jeddah were Mercedes was actually faster than Ferrari in that particular race, mm-hmm. Which was kind of a surprise. But the other biggest thing was there was actually no crashes. We haven't talked about it explicitly,
right. and that's what's going to be my next question as far as the changes. Go ahead.
Because we were assuming that there's going to be a safety car, and there was, that we thought everything was normal.
Right. But
it wasn't actually a necessary safety car. Mm-mm. Right. If you look at where Lance Stroll retired, he parked his car. You could not have parked his car more perfectly in a situation where you could get it off of the track, because the marshals didn't even have to enter the track to remove the car from the track.
He literally put it on the crane.
Almost literally.
Almost to the crane, right.
That's how good of a job he did in taking the car off the track. And so, yes, I like the safety car because it spiced the race up a little bit. It gave us that. It helped Verstappen.
Yeah, it did help Checo. He wasn't liking it.
Closer to Perez, but Checo, he fought hard to be able to keep that gap. But in terms of the safety, Jeddah is unforgiving. It doesn't have to necessarily be dangerous, and in fact, it's a little bit less dangerous now with the changes to the walls, moving them back, keeping the track the same. Mm-hmm. Yeah, keeping the track the same, but moving the walls back a little bit to improve visibility. There's a little bit more area for cars to spin if they lose it on turn 22, on entry 22. So I think that there are a lot of other factors involved with Jeddah that have nothing to do with racing, that are more to do with where it is in the world. There's a whole other conversation to be had. But in terms of the track itself, it is a very exciting track. It's a lot of speed. It rewards commitment in a way that other tracks don't necessarily. And Checo seems to thrive there.
Yeah, he did.
His only 2 pole positions were there. He probably would have won there last year if you go back and look at how he was actually performing. He probably could have won last year without losing the lead in the safety car, and he had the pace this year. And we know Max is a good driver in general, but I think people misremember how good his qualifying is. People were like, he's also an amazing qualifier. He does qualifying amazing. No one can ever touch him. That's not really his biggest strength. Mm. Max's biggest strength has always been race pace. It's always been this brutal, metronomic, just like super aggressive race pace that just withers away other people, lap after lap after lap. And Checo was able to resist that, even though he got caught out by a safety car to a degree. So full props to Checo for sure.
For sure. Man, turn 22, let's just dive in that a little bit. What do you think the big issue was there? Do you think it was the tightness of that short S, or do you think it was the fact that it kind of, what do you think it was? Because the drivers had a big issue, or not a big issue. They definitely had a problem solving that Rubik's Cube in free practice, where many of them were spinning off. And I want to credit, who was it? Was it Oscar and De Vries? Like, literally, they could have wrecked those cars, and they did a great job at saving them not to ruin a car, especially after De Vries having to have his repaired, and Oscar coming out of the situation from Bahrain and into here, he still ran into a front wing damage. But what do you think turn 22 offered the challenge to those drivers where they just couldn't quite get it?
It's an interesting corner. Not only did they have trouble in free practice, but they had trouble in the race. There is this somewhat comical shot of Max chasing down Checo at the end of the race, and I saw a car go off into the turn 23, inside the apex of 23, at that big chicane, and a Red Bull go off. I was like, oh, that's interesting. That's fine. Let the car go off. And then another car just like it goes off the exact same way. like 5 seconds later, you're like whoa, what? Was that a double check? I think it may have been Blake who'd argued that if you're not, at least being warned about black and white flags, you're not pushing hard enough, you're not using the track as much as you can. But I think one of the things that makes it hard is it's a very high speed entry to that corner. It is, and it's like a medium to high speed chicane, and it's not like the old Variante Alta at Imola in the old days, where it was like a very tight chicane, and it was just like you could fly through it over the curbs. It's a significant offset between the apexes, and so you have to slow down quite a bit, and that requires you to load the front of the car, it unloads the rear of the car, and if you put too much deceleration in the car or give it too much steering input, you can lose the rear very, very easily. And especially if there's wind gusts or something, it can throw off the car. It's high enough speed to do that. And so that's kind of what's caught people out. It's also one of those weird situations where you lose brake temperature on the way to the corner, right? You have another slower speed chicane before that point, and then you have that middle part where you're just going for 8 seconds, 10 seconds flat out, very high speed, and all that time you're losing brake temperature.
True.
And then all of a sudden you get to the entry and you got to rely on the brakes, and if for some reason they're not at the right temperature, they can catch you out and lock it. So it is good that the drivers have been safe. Overall, I think it's just a tricky corner, but it's a good corner though. And
I think
like
that
I think it's one of those corners that really rewards good driving and precise driving, not getting too high on that curb of 23. And I think that by moving the barriers a little bit more to the side, giving the cars a little bit more room to spin if they do spin, it gives you the benefit of that fun factor of the corner
without
but
the consequences.
A little bit less of the danger.
True. So matter of fact, man, talking about that brings me to this, because I don't want to see it changed. Miami turns 14, 15 or 15, 16. I actually liked them the first season. I don't want to see them change. I think it was a good challenge. I don't think they should change it now. As far as the barrier and Tech Pro and the safety situation, I do think pretty much similar to what they did to Jeddah, giving them more visibility to bringing that information sooner so they can see what's around that corner, hopefully not to be able to T-bone another car. But I don't want to see those turns in Miami change more than I want to see safety around there or changes done to that. How do you feel about that before we get to Miami? Do you think there's going to be some changes in that section?
Oh, well, they're definitely resurfacing the track this year. We already know that because the track surface was not really up to standards last time.
Correct.
But what people don't realize is the reason why that section is so tight and so twisty is partly about safety, and it's actually about constraints defined by the real estate of the property. People who are in Florida or know Florida know about I-95 and all the other things that are the major roads that are in that area. In that corner of the track, there's actually like nowhere to put runoff or like gravel or grass or anything. Like the property stops like pretty much right there near those walls, and so you can't have a car approaching that at very high speed. And you can't have a car have like a high-speed corner there because there's no runoff, there's nowhere to go into for them to actually have a Tech Pro barrier or something that would make sense that the angle is not right for it to really work. And so the solution is kind of to make it as a very slow, very technical left-right, area before that long run down to the final couple of corners. And I'm fine with it not changing. I think it had a rhythm all its own. I do agree that there should be some barrier changes where call signs and Esteban Ocon went off in that sort of fast left kink there. It's just concrete like wall there, and given the glancing angle and the speed of the cars, safer barrier might be too hard to put there. But one layer of Tech Pro might be better than what they have currently. Okay. Because Esteban cracked his chassis actually in that crash. So it's an indication that the barrier there is not good enough.
Not sufficient.
But no, the short answer is that I don't think it should change in terms of the track configuration. We do know the track surface itself is changing, which should improve things a lot.
All right. So let's talk about the fallen team from heaven. Hopefully one day we'll get back. Williams. One of my secret favorite teams, not so secret, I say all the time, like I really would like to see Williams get back to being a highly competitive team from which they came initially. I think people maybe coming just into the sport don't realize how successful Williams were at a point of time in Formula One history. What do you think their improvements are attributed to this season? Because to me it seems like Williams is in a good spot to probably become a midfield team, like legitimately a midfield team is what I'm thinking like through the season. I think that's exciting. I know people are wrapped up in Mercedes and Max and certain, but it is exciting for me to see a team like Williams make a jump and then maybe legitimately become a midfield competitor. How do you feel, and what do you feel that's attributed to?
I think they definitely will be a midfield competitor. So part of this is due to the focus on the team and what the team specifically is trying to do with developments that they're bringing. I mean, they had huge updates and over the winter that made them more competitive. But this is a single instance of a larger trend, which is convergence that I mentioned previously. Not only just in terms of converging on a specific design philosophy, but just the teams getting closer together. Yes, it's true that Red Bull is, getting further and further apart, seemingly unaffected by some of the attempts to close the grid. We'll talk about reasons why that might change in the future. Okay. But the entire rest of the midfield is kind of condensed now. There was definitely a time in the past couple of seasons where there was a top end, front-running teams, a clearly defined midfield, and then clearly defined back markers that were off the tail of the midfield, that weren't even really competing in the midfield. True. That's not really the case anymore. Williams, Haas, McLaren, AlphaTauri, Alfa Romeo, they're separated by less now than they ever have been, which means that individual races, individual driver performances, or unlucky accidents like Lando Norris had running over Oscar Piastri's front end plate. Right. Both McLarens were affected by the same incident, and they had to pit as a result of it. But I think that the entire midfield is condensed significantly this season, and so yes, Williams has made progress. In fact, they've probably made the most progress of all the midfield teams. But behind Aston Martin, Williams is the team that improved the second most.
Right, and I agree with that
by my estimation. So I definitely think that they're in a position where they could be competitive. I mean, look, I'm not going to slate Nicholas Latifi more than I have to. But suffice it to say, there's no limit to how much time a bad driver can cost you.
Man, that's
right.
For real.
And the thing is, you can't know for sure how much time you're losing until you have a more competitive driver there. I think, for his credit, Logan Sargent has been very competitive in the past couple of races. I mean, a bit of luck, a bit of misfortune in qualifying in Jeddah that kind of made his life more difficult than it needed to be. But it was a mistake.
It was a mistake, right.
It was a mistake. He made a mistake. But, Esteban Ocon made mistakes too, and his car just didn't break.
Right.
And that's where the luck comes in. But no, I think that the driver pairing that they have definitely has the potential to be very good. And as I said, the entire midfield is condensed now to a degree that it hasn't been before. So individual performances from drivers, individual races, one key strategy difference is going to make all the difference in the world. One of the most entertaining on-track battles that we saw in Jeddah was between Kevin Magnussen and Yuki Tsunoda for the last point.
Ooh, that was hard for Yuki.
Yeah, well, they fought it pretty fairly, right. and they fought it well, but Haas is not a backmarker team anymore.
Hey, bro,
Haas is a midfield team, and they have the potential to be even better. So I think there's going to be a lot of exciting racing this season. I think there's going to be a lot of upsets this season. Williams and Aston Martin's gains are kind of McLaren's loss, it seems.
I was just about to say that.
Their race pace isn't terrible. And Oscar Piastri's been doing really well. He's already demonstrating he's a better fit for that car than Daniel Ricciardo was.
Right, true.
But even then, I think that it's going to swing a lot as the season goes on. Not only because different circuits suit different cars in a slightly different way to shift the balance of power, but the cars themselves are being developed as the season goes on. And so things that a car might not be good at now, they could be amazing at later, or some team could bring an amazing upgrade, not necessarily a full B-spec car, even though I'm sorry some teams might consider that, but a major upgrade that delivers a lot of pace, and then suddenly the power dynamics change because of that too.
So you think that it's possible, but by you just saying what you said, you have had a thought of possibly seeing a totally B-spec car come out this season? And if so, what teams do you think you would possibly, and this is just hypothetical people, like we're not holding Bryson anything, just what teams do you think, if that did happen, who do you think you would see it from?
No, I don't. I don't think I can identify any specific team, and I want to be clear about what I mean by a B-spec car. I don't mean B-spec car in the sense of what the old B-spec cars seem to be, where the entire chassis, monocoque, and everything would change,
Right.
because in the cost cap, there's not really
not room for
enough
that.
resources to change the full chassis. But the bodywork, the aero, the concept of that within mechanical constraints definitely can change. That's definitely something that's going to happen with Mercedes.
Okay.
Not to be clear, my understanding is that the upgrade that they have coming in Imola, something that's already in the pipeline. They already are going down a different development path than they were, the car that they built for the current races. It's not in reaction to that radical shift that was revealed in Bahrain. They're bringing something that's maybe worth like 3 or 4 tenths. I don't know. Something, big, but
that's
not
that's
really massive.
nice.
If they really are talking about a true B-spec car in the sense that I'm talking about, a shift in the air philosophy, really that would be more along like the Silverstone time frame.
Okay.
Kind of like what Williams did last season. You remember Williams had one particular concept of their car for the first part of the season. And then in Silverstone, they had a much more Red Bull-esque design.
Right, the side pod to improve.
A downwashing side pod.
Right.
There are also tweaks to the beam wing and the rear wing and some other things. And the engine cover were different as well. But that's kind of what I'm thinking for Mercedes. I know McLaren is definitely another one looking for a B-spec, because they had already said, if Mercedes were in trouble by not being fast enough even though they said they hit their targets, McLaren was even in an even worse position, because they are saying even at the launch that they didn't hit their targets.
Right.
They didn't hit their efficiency targets. And in raw terms, really what that means is there's too much drag for the amount of downforce they were creating. And so I think that's one of the things that they were hoping to fix. And sometimes it's just a constraint by manufacturing, because it takes time to actually figure out that the concept works, start building it, and then bring it to the track. If you happen to come across a very fruitful development direction too late in the process, in the build process, even if it's worth a second and a half, you can't bring it to the car, because it's not ready yet. You can't bring. There's not enough time to build it, and there's logistical problems with these early few races that are flyaway races anyway. So I think a lot of the changes that we're going to see are going to start happening in the European races, Imola, Barcelona, Silverstone later. But I think that people are overestimating how much of Red Bull's performance that we see currently is a function of them just being amazing and not having any kind of competition, and how much of it is them being ahead in the previous season, and the car that we're seeing on track right now basically being designed like halfway through last season. People keep arguing. They say, well, why isn't the cost cap effective? Why isn't the punishments that Red Bull's supposed to be getting effective? They're still so far ahead. And the way I would sort of respond to that is, we can have a discussion about how intense the penalties should be, but the car that we're seeing today wouldn't be affected by the penalties anyway, because it was designed early on last season, and because they were running away with both championships, that gives them even more time to next year's car, to give them an advantage in that sense. And so if there are major hurdles and struggles that Red Bull's going to deal with, besides their reliability concerns that have still been there, that actually played into Checo's and Max's fight, which we can talk about. If there are concerns beyond reliability for Red Bull, it's going to be if the regulations change for next year, if there's some sort of tweak that they make in order to improve safety or do some other thing. I don't think it would be a pure performance thing to hold them back, but given how much faster the cars are than they're expected to be, we're starting to get to a point where Pirelli might be in trouble, right? Because the faster the cars are, the more load they put in the tires. And the thing is, the tires are already constructed and built before the season even starts.
Right, and they've already kind of recognized that already before.
Before the season starts, every team has to give Pirelli their prediction of like how fast they are and how much faster they think they'll get over the course of the year. And those calculations are being used to decide what the tire construction is, how robust it needs to be, what compounds you can use, et cetera, et cetera. If you go beyond that, if the cars are going much faster than anticipated, suddenly you have concerns over the structural integrity of the tire, because the faster you go, the more load you put into it. And suddenly you could find yourself in Silverstone 2020 situation, or the Silverstone back in, was it 2012 or 2011 where they blew all those tires as well. And so the thing is that is something that I would argue we're already starting to see the signs of. Yep. If you remember, there was a note on Saturday morning that the minimum tire pressures were going to be raised by like a half a PSI or a PSI in the front and rear. And again, we didn't get official confirmation as to why that was the case.
I didn't recall
but
that.
But nine times out of 10, the reason why you increase the tire pressure is because you're worried about the structural integrity of the tire. It's the same thing that happened after Baku in 2021. You know, teams were getting kind of tricky with the tire pressures, and there are concerns there. But yeah, we do have to keep an eye on how things are going to develop in the future, because yes, there's the open question of competitive fairness and how exciting racing is. It's a whole conversation about that. Mm-hmm. But it's an entirely separate conversation about safety that's just as important.
True.
So
true.
Yeah.
Well, man, Bryson, so before we leave, let's just talk about this dynamic between this situation between Max and Perez. I just feel, honestly, I understand team orders. I understand, and I credit teams that pick a definite leader and who we are going to put our coins into as far as a driver championship campaign. I mean, I think there's a certain ruthlessness to that, but I do agree with the fact that it can be very beneficial not to spread yourself thin inside the team. But it's a new season, and I think Perez has every right. Driver championships don't come around all the time. And if you have an opportunity to possibly get one because you see it's there, I think Perez has every right to push, and even sometimes, like Max has done, ignore team orders to do so. How do you feel about that situation at Red Bull?
I don't think it's the Red Bull team itself that Checo needs to necessarily worry about. As regarding, you know, what instructions they were giving him and how fast he should go. I think the issue there wasn't really Red Bull specifically. It was just Max.
Right.
It was just Max not accepting
team orders.
The team orders. And we've seen that he will do that from time to time.
Brazil.
And yeah. But you know, the fact that Max even got the fastest lap in the end was essentially against team orders too. And so I think, as long as Checo and everyone else is on the same page, that page being Red Bull is going to give you instructions. In principle, they're going to be instructions to give you an opportunity to still win and not disadvantage you to what Max is doing. However, Max is not going to do that. Mm-hmm. Max is going to attack you at every opportunity. So as long as you understand that and recognize that that's the environment that you're working in, I think Checo can still be successful. Okay. Just assuming, and I think he's already there now. Mm-hmm. I think he was getting there previously, but now he really knows. This exactly what you said is right. Checo almost didn't even have a drive in 2021, which would have been the worst thing in the world. But the thing is, he's actually like one of the best possible fits for Red Bull, not only because of where his pace is and how he is as a driver, but just his driving acumen, mm-hmm. his years of racing, and his ability to understand situationally how to fight other drivers and how to defend and how to race. I mean, his defenses are sometimes over the line, right, for sure. But he's not on the opposite side of the spectrum where people were just flying past him, right? Like Bottas was. Right. He really will fight, and so this is his best opportunity to fight for a championship, and absolutely he has the right to do that. I mean, there was a slightly weird thing that happened in the aftermath of the race, mm-hmm. where he was saying, it was a tough day, but we had a great race. He said it's in Spanish. It was a tough day, but we had a great race, and I want to be champion one day, and this is what I need to do to get there. And then that post was deleted, and then it was reposted again, exactly the same wording, but the part where he says, I want to be champion, was removed. Now, I'm not going to speculate why that was the case or why or if he was instructed to do that, but that's worrying to me because it's almost as if he was being chided for like thought crimes. Right. It's like you think you got the right to think that? You think you can win a championship? I mean, almost as if it wasn't enough for him to physically and effectively be number 2 in the team, but he had to be number 2 in his own mind. And I think that's the thing that was kind of weird. I definitely think that there's some people on the team who believe that. I know Max believes that, and I know his dad believes that.
Oh, yes.
But at the same time, you have to give Checo an opportunity to fight for a championship if you can. Not only is that the best thing for the team as far as scoring, points and giving them the Constructors Championship, but, Max should be able to beat him if he's better than him. So just let them go. And to be clear, I do think Max is better than Checo.
Right.
I think over the course of the season, he will beat him. But that's a separate question from, are you going to hold someone back? And again, I don't think that Red Bull did that with their request for the timings. I think it was just more Max not following the instructions that they were both given. But I don't want to see something in the future where Checo is leading a race, either by merit or just by happenstance. He's just in a good situation, and then he's just being asked to be moved over.
Right, I don't want to see that.
I think the situation in Barcelona last year was very, very close to just being totally beyond the line. Yeah. In terms of giving someone an opportunity to win. But again, that's just a question for another time.
Right.
I do think that the inter-team battle is probably going to be, as I said before, Jeddah and Bahrain are very different circuits. Mm-hmm. And so I think that that's enough proof for me that Red Bull is going to be very competitive everywhere. And Aston Martin's going to be competitive too. Mm-hmm. Just not competitive enough to catch Red Bull. So I think that probably one of the more entertaining battles at the front, at least, will be between Perez and Verstappen. And as you rightly pointed out about Brazil, last season, there is tension there.
Yes.
And it's not the type of thing that I expect to boil over necessarily, but I also don't expect Checo to just be a pushover.
I don't, and I hope not.
In the situation, I think he's going to definitely, fight for wins and a championship if it's possible.
Good. Man, Bryson, I really appreciate it, brother, man. You want to let these people know where they can reach you and come get some of that tech head talk, man?
Yeah, that's what we're going to call it next time on the show. We're going to call it tech head talk. No. I mean, we're, so I'm Bryson Natural Paradigm on Twitter and Instagram as well. Tech Heads F1 has a Twitter page and an Instagram page and a YouTube page now, where some of us are doing some tech bites videos. But primarily check the podcast. We didn't do an episode in this previous week because not all of the parties were really available to do so. People are having vacations and something like that. But we probably will be recording one in the next couple of days. And so that'll be releasing next week. And we'll just be online watching how the season develops. I know that, at the front, we'd like to see a battle for the championship, and we might not really get that this season, but that doesn't mean there's not going to be a lot of interesting things to look at, and I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you, man. I keep saying this, people like, man, I'm just saying there are a lot of interesting things to pay attention to. It's just not about Mercedes and Red Bull. There are a lot of good things going on. You got the rookies, you got teams that were back markers, now midfield competitors. There are so many things to pay attention to. So, like Bryson said, hey, you head on over there, check out that Tech Talk, because I'm trying to tell you, they do a great job at it. It is wholesome. It is good. It's involved. His background and his acumen for Formula One and aerodynamics definitely give you a bit of a sweet taste to your ear for performance. And this is another episode of Performance Talk. We'll see you all soon. Peace. Thanks for watching another episode of Wolfpack Performance. Don't forget to check out some of my other content on Formula One and motorsports topics. Like, share, subscribe, and we go live on the weekends. See you soon.